Welcome to Touching Animal Stories. The Silent Watcher. How a broken-eared dog saved a girl who never cried. You know, sometimes I think the ocean knows more secrets than any person ever could. Not in some mystical, magical way, nothing like that, but simply because it's been there, watching, listening for so long. It's heard the whispers of lovers on the beach, the prayers of fishermen heading out at dawn, the confessions of people who thought the waves were the only ones who wouldn't judge them. And sometimes, if you listen closely when the tide is going out, you can almost hear those secrets being carried away with the water. I'm telling you this because the ocean is where this story begins, though not in the way you might expect. Not with a dramatic rescue from drowning or some cliche about a dog pulling a child from the waves. No, this story starts with silence. The kind of silence that's so complete it feels like the world is holding its breath. Let me introduce myself. My name is Eleanor, but everyone in Havens Point calls me Ellie. I've lived in this small coastal town in Maine for 53 years, born here, raised here, and if the good Lord is willing, I'll probably die here too. I run the local library, which is really just a converted fishing shack with more books than it was ever meant to hold. The kind of place where people come not just for reading material, but for the quiet comfort of knowing someone's always there, even if it's just an old woman who remembers when the town had only 3 stop signs. Now, about Havens Point. It's the kind of place that doesn't appear on most maps, tucked away on a peninsula where the Atlantic Ocean crashes against rocky shores with a kind of relentless determination. Population 417, if you count Mrs. Henderson's 3 cats, which she does because they pay rent in purrs. It's the kind of town where everyone knows your business, but out of respect they pretend they don't. Where the fishing boats come in at dawn with their catches, and the smell of salt and diesel hangs in the air like a familiar old friend. I should mention that Havens Point has a rhythm to it, a seasonal heartbeat that dictates everything. Summer brings tourists who think they've discovered some hidden gem, as if we've been hiding here on purpose, filling the few bed and breakfasts and the diner with their loud voices and sunscreen-scented skin. Fall brings the lobstermen in earnest, their boats bobbing in the harbor like colorful corks. Winter brings snow and isolation, and the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own thoughts too clearly. And spring. Spring brings the slow awakening, the first green shoots pushing through the cold earth, the return of the migratory birds, and a sense that maybe, just maybe, the world hasn't forgotten about us after all. It was late August when everything began to change, though none of us knew it at the time. The tourists were packing up, the summer rentals were being closed for the season, and the town was settling back into its quieter self. That's when the new family arrived, the Garcias. Not unusual for late season, but there was something different about them. They moved into the old Callahan place, that weathered blue cottage at the end of Seagull Lane that had been empty for years. The mother, Maria, was a nurse who had taken a position at the small clinic in the next town over. She was quiet but warm, with eyes that seemed to carry more than they should for someone so young. And then there was her daughter, Clara, 7 years old with hair the color of autumn leaves and eyes that were too serious for her age. Clara didn't speak much. Not that she couldn't, she just chose not to, it seemed. She'd nod or shake her head, occasionally point, but words were rare treasures. Some of the town gossips whispered about trauma, about why a mother and daughter would leave everything behind to come to our little corner of the world. But Maria never explained, and in Havens Point, we've learned that some doors are better left unknocked upon. Now, I need to tell you about Murphy. Not because he was special, oh, quite the opposite, but because his ordinariness was what made everything that followed so extraordinary. Murphy was a dog, a scruffy, medium-sized mutt with one ear that stood up straight and the other that flopped over like a broken sail. He'd been wandering around town for as long as anyone could remember, showing up occasionally for scraps, but never staying long enough for anyone to claim him. Old man Peterson, who runs the bait shop, used to say Murphy was a war dog, brought back from some overseas conflict and abandoned when his handler couldn't cope with the memories. Mrs. Abernathy from the post office insisted he was a purebred German shepherd who'd escaped from some fancy kennel after being mistreated. The truth was probably much simpler. He was just a stray, surviving as best he could, his past written in the scars along his flank, and the way he flinched at sudden movements. What made Murphy unusual wasn't his appearance or his mysterious history, but his silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a well-trained dog, but a complete absence of vocalization. He never barked, never whined, never growled. Not when the children chased him, not when the winter storms raged, not even when Billy Carter threw rocks at him one drunken night behind the diner. He just existed, moving through our town like a shadow, observing but never participating. I'd tried to feed him a few times, leaving bowls of food outside the library, but he'd only come when no one was around, and even then he'd eat quickly and disappear. There was something almost military in the way he carried himself. Alert, aware of his surroundings, always positioned so he could see all possible exits. It made you wonder what he'd seen in his life to make him so cautious. Now, here's where things began to get strange. Within days of the Garcias moving in, Murphy started showing up at the Callahan place. Not in the yard, not approaching the house, but always at the edge of the property, sitting beneath the old pine tree that overlooks the driveway. He'd watch Clara as she played in the yard, his head tilted slightly, one ear up, one ear down, completely still. At first, Maria didn't seem to mind. She'd sometimes leave food out for him, which he'd take only when she was back inside the house. But then Clara started going for walks. Short ones at first, just down to the end of Seagull Lane and back, always accompanied by her mother. And Murphy began following them. Not close enough to be threatening, mind you. Always about 50 yards behind, matching their pace, stopping when they stopped, turning when they turned. It was unsettling, really. In a town this small, we're protective of our children, and the sight of a strange dog, well, strange to us, though he'd been around for years, shadowing a little girl who couldn't even call for help if she needed to. Let's just say it raised eyebrows. I remember the first time I saw it happen. I was putting up the back-to-school display in the library window. Yes, we have a school, a tiny one-room building that's been here since 1923, when I noticed them through the glass. Clara skipping ahead, Maria walking slowly behind her, and then about half a block back, Murphy. Just there, watching. I went outside to speak with Maria. "You know that dog's been following you, don't you?" I asked gently, not wanting to alarm her. Maria looked tired, the kind of tired that goes beyond just not sleeping well. "Yes," she said. "He's been doing it for days. I called animal control, but they said he's not causing any trouble, so there's nothing they can do." "Have you considered—" I hesitated, not wanting to overstep. "Well, some dogs can be unpredictable, especially strays." Maria gave me a look then that I'll never forget. It wasn't fear or anger, but something deeper. Resignation, maybe, or the weight of a secret too heavy to carry alone. "He's not dangerous," she said finally. "If anything, he seems to be watching over her." I didn't know what to make of that, so I just nodded and went back inside. But the incident stayed with me, like a pebble in your shoe that you can't quite ignore. Over the next few weeks, Murphy's presence became a topic of conversation at the diner, at the post office, even at Sunday service at the little white church by the water. Some people started calling him Stalker Dog, which felt cruel but was undeniably accurate. Mrs. Henderson even organized a petition to have him removed from the area, concerned for the safety of all the children in town. One afternoon, I saw Billy Carter, our resident troublemaker, though he's really just a bored young man with too much time and too little direction, corner Murphy near the old lighthouse. Billy had a stick in his hand, and that mean glint in his eye that comes from wanting to prove something to himself. "Get out of here, you mangy mutt!" Billy yelled, waving the stick. "No one wants you hanging around the kids." Murphy didn't run. He didn't growl. He just sat there, his head tilted, watching Billy with those calm, intelligent eyes. When Billy took a step closer, Murphy stood up slowly, deliberately, and took one step toward Clara's house. Then he stopped and looked back at Billy. It wasn't a challenge exactly, but it was clear where his priorities lay. Billy threw the stick at him, but Murphy didn't flinch. The stick landed a few feet short, and Murphy just waited. Finally, Billy gave up and walked away, muttering to himself. I was standing nearby, having come to collect some seashells for the library's children's corner, and I saw the whole thing. When Billy was gone, Murphy looked at me for a long moment, then turned and walked back to his spot under the pine tree. It was the first time he'd ever acknowledged my presence. Now I should tell you about Clara's condition, though I didn't know it at the time. Maria only shared this with me much later after everything had happened. Clara had a rare neurological condition called Landau-Kleffner syndrome, sometimes called acquired aphasia with convulsive disorder. In simple terms, it meant that while Clara had developed normal speech as a toddler, something had triggered a loss of language skills around age 5, along with silent seizures that didn't involve convulsions but could cause temporary paralysis, confusion, or even loss of consciousness. The silent part is crucial here. Unlike typical seizures that are dramatic and obvious, Clara's episodes could happen without anyone noticing. She might suddenly stop responding, her eyes glazing over, her body going still for 30 seconds to a few minutes. To an outsider, it might look like she was just daydreaming or being stubborn, but during these episodes she was completely vulnerable, unable to call for help, or even move to protect herself. Maria had moved to Havens Point hoping for a fresh start, a place where no one knew about Clara's condition, where her daughter could be judged on her present rather than her medical history. She carried the constant vigilance of a parent who knows their child's greatest danger is invisible to everyone else. But what Maria didn't know, and what none of us knew, was that Murphy could sense these episodes before they happened. It started subtly. Clara would be walking with her mother, and Murphy, who was always at a respectful distance, would suddenly become more alert, his body tensing, his gaze fixed on Clara. Then, as the seizure began to approach, he'd move closer, not threateningly, but deliberately, positioning himself between Clara and potential hazards. The first time this happened that I witnessed, Clara was walking home from the library. She loved the picture books, especially the ones about birds. Maria was a few steps behind, checking her phone for work messages. Clara stopped suddenly, her eyes losing focus, her small body going rigid. Just as she began to tip forward, Murphy darted in and positioned himself against her side, preventing her from falling onto the rocky path. Maria looked up just in time to see Clara steadying herself against the dog, who stood perfectly still, allowing her to use him as support until the episode passed. When Clara's eyes cleared and she could move again, Murphy stepped back to his usual distance, as if nothing had happened. I was sitting on the bench outside the library, pretending to read, but actually watching this strange dance between child and dog. I saw the look of dawning understanding on Maria's face. The realization that Murphy wasn't following them out of menace, but out of some deep, instinctual purpose. But here's where things get complicated, because while Maria began to understand Murphy's behavior, the rest of the town didn't. If anything, they became more concerned. To them, it looked like the dog was getting bolder, moving closer to Clara, even touching her. Mrs. Henderson started a Facebook group called Keep Havens Point Safe for Kids, which, despite our town having only 17 Facebook users, quickly gained traction. One particularly tense afternoon, I was at the general store when Billy Carter came in, red-faced and angry. "That dog attacked me!" he declared to anyone who would listen. "Right in front of the Garcia place. I was just walking by, minding my own business, and that mutt came at me, teeth bared." I knew Billy well enough to be skeptical. "What were you doing near the Garcia place?" I asked. "None of your business, Ellie," he snapped. "Point is, that dog's dangerous. Someone needs to put it down before it hurts a kid." Maria came into the store just then, having heard the commotion from outside. "Murphy didn't attack you," she said calmly. "I saw what happened. You were trying to pull Clara away from him." Billy's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "That's ridiculous. I was just saying hello to the kid." "Clara doesn't like to be touched unexpectedly," Maria said, her voice still calm but with an edge I hadn't heard before. "You reached for her, and Murphy positioned himself between you. He didn't growl or show his teeth, he just stood his ground. That's not an attack, that's protection." The store went quiet. Even Billy seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Later, Maria explained to me what had really happened. Clara had been having a minor episode, her eyes distant, her body swaying slightly. Billy, not understanding, had reached out to steady her, not realizing that sudden contact could disorient her further during a seizure. Murphy had stepped in, not to attack, but to create a barrier, giving Clara space to recover without additional sensory input. The problem was, no one else saw it that way. To the town, it looked like a stray dog was becoming increasingly aggressive, putting children at risk. The pressure mounted to have Murphy removed, or as some suggested, put down. I should mention that by this point I had started spending more time with Maria and Clara. Not in a formal way, just little things. I'd save interesting shells for Clara. Maria would bring me homemade tamales as thanks, and slowly a friendship developed. One rainy afternoon when the library was closed and Maria had the day off, she came over with Clara and finally told me the truth about her daughter's condition. "It's called Landau-Kleffner," Maria explained as Clara carefully arranged seashells on my coffee table. "Most people have never heard of it. It's rare. About 1 in a million children. Clara was perfectly normal until she was 5. Then, over the course of a few months, she stopped speaking, stopped understanding language. It was like she was disappearing before my eyes." She paused, watching her daughter, who was completely absorbed in her task, her small fingers tracing the spirals of the conch shells. "The doctors still don't know what causes it. There are treatments, but they're not always effective. And the seizures? They're the most dangerous part. Silent, unpredictable, and she has no warning when they're coming." I thought about Murphy, always at just the right distance, always alert when Clara seemed most vulnerable. "And Murphy," Maria nodded, "he senses them. Not all dogs can do this, but some, usually ones with military or service dog training, develop the ability to detect oncoming seizures. I think Murphy must have been trained for something like this before. Whatever happened to him?" We sat in silence for a moment, watching Clara. She looked up and smiled at us, a small, secret smile that seemed to say she understood more than she could express. "But the town doesn't understand," I said finally. "They see a stray dog getting too close to a child and they think the worst." Maria's expression was weary. "I know, and I can't exactly go around telling everyone my daughter has a rare neurological disorder. That's not her story to have spread around town." "No," I agreed, "but there has to be a way to make them see what we see." The truth was, there wasn't an easy way. The town's concern grew, fueled by Billy Carter's exaggerations and Mrs. Henderson's well-meaning but misguided activism. Animal control was called multiple times, though each time they confirmed Murphy wasn't acting aggressively, he was just present. Then came the day of the Harvest Festival, Havens Point's biggest event of the year. The whole town gathers at the community center for games, food, and the crowning of the Apple Queen. Yes, we have apple trees here, despite what you might think about Maine's climate. It's the one day when everyone puts aside their differences and pretends we're one big happy family. Maria and Clara were there, as were most of the town's residents. Murphy, as usual, was at the edge of the gathering, sitting quietly beneath a maple tree, watching Clara as she examined the craft tables with intense focus. The festival was in full swing, children laughing, adults chatting, the smell of apple cider and fried dough filling the air, when I noticed something odd. Murphy had stood up, not in a threatening way, but with that deliberate, purposeful movement I'd come to recognize. He was looking intently at Clara, who was standing near the edge of the field, examining a display of handmade birdhouses. I glanced at Maria, who was talking with the schoolteacher, and saw her face change. She'd noticed Clara too. Her daughter had gone still, her eyes losing focus, the telltale signs of an approaching seizure. But before Maria could reach her daughter, something remarkable happened. Murphy began to move, not toward Clara, but toward the road that runs alongside the field. He walked deliberately to the center of the road and sat down, facing the direction from which cars would approach. At first, I didn't understand. Then I saw it. Billy Carter's pickup truck, coming down the road, Billy at the wheel, clearly showing off by driving faster than was safe for our narrow lanes. And Clara, still in the grip of her silent seizure, was standing right at the edge of the field, dangerously close to the road. Murphy sat perfectly still in the middle of the road, his one ear up, one ear down, completely blocking Billy's path. Billy slammed on his brakes, the truck skidding slightly on the gravel, stopping just feet from the dog. The festival went quiet as people turned to see what had happened. Billy got out of his truck, furious. "I'm going to kill that dog," he shouted, advancing toward Murphy, who still hadn't moved. But Maria was already there, reaching Clara just as her episode passed. She scooped her daughter into her arms and turned to face Billy. "You're going to explain to the entire town why you were driving recklessly toward a child having a medical emergency," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent field. The truth came out then, not all at once, but in pieces. Maria explained Clara's condition, how the seizures could happen without warning, how Murphy had been sensing them and protecting her daughter. I added what I knew about Murphy's possible background, how some dogs are trained to detect medical emergencies. But the real proof came from an unexpected source. Old Man Peterson, who ran the bait shop. "I knew it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I served with Murphy's handler in Afghanistan. His name was Jake Morrison, and Murphy was his service dog after Jake lost his hearing in an IED blast. Murphy could sense Jake's seizures before they happened. When Jake didn't make it back from a mission, Murphy disappeared. We all thought he'd been killed too." He looked at Murphy, who was still sitting calmly in the road, completely ignoring the commotion around him. All these years, he's been looking for someone else who needed his help. The festival ended differently than anyone expected. Instead of crowning an apple queen, the town gathered around Maria and Clara and Murphy. Billy Carter, surprisingly, was the first to apologize, admitting he'd been driving too fast and hadn't seen Clara in his rush to show off. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Murphy was no longer stalker dog, but simply Murphy, Clara's protector. The town rallied around them, Mrs. Henderson organized a fundraiser to get Murphy properly registered as a service animal. The school teacher created a quiet space at the school for Clara to recover after episodes, and even Billy Carter started volunteering at the community center, helping with after-school programs. But the most remarkable change was in Clara herself. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to speak again. Not full sentences at first, but single words, then phrases. Maria later told me the doctors believed the security Murphy provided had reduced Clara's anxiety, which in turn was helping her brain rewire itself. One crisp October morning, about 3 months after the festival, I was walking to the library when I saw Clara and Murphy by the shore. Clara was pointing at something in the water, and for the first time I'd ever heard, she spoke. "Look, Murphy," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Seagull." Murphy looked where she was pointing, then back at Clara, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. His version of a wag, I suppose. Then he sat down beside her, keeping watch as she watched the birds. I stood there for a moment, watching them, the rising sun casting long shadows across the sand. The ocean was calm that morning, the waves rolling in with that gentle, rhythmic sound that has comforted this town for generations. And in that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes the people, or dogs, who seem most out of place are exactly where they're meant to be. Sometimes the quiet ones see what the rest of us miss. And sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear capes or make dramatic entrances. They just show up day after day, ready to stand in the road when it matters most. You know, I still think the ocean knows more secrets than any person ever could. But I've come to realize that sometimes those secrets aren't carried away with the tide. Sometimes they wash up on shore in the form of a broken-eared dog and a quiet little girl who needed each other more than anyone knew. And if you listen closely when the tide is going out, you might just hear something new. A child's voice, tentative but hopeful, saying, "Look, Murphy," followed by the soft sound of a dog's contented sigh. Because in Haven's Point, we've learned that the most important secrets aren't the ones the ocean takes away. They're the ones it brings to us gently, like a gift wrapped in seaweed and delivered by the morning tide.